I say kairete. You say kaira. That's right. Okay? Kaira. You say kaira back to me. I say tiana masoi. Petros, right? Tiana masoi. He says he's Petros. So now I can say pathen esu. Pathen esu. Because we've introduced ourselves to each other, and Dr. Brookins. But I can say pathen esu, and I mean, where are you from? Okay? So when I say pathen esu, everybody tell me at the same time where you're from. Pathen esu. No, I've got to say pathen e humes if I'm saying it to all of you. So let's do that. Pathen e humes. Nice. I think I got all that. Okay. Pathen esu. Tatum. What's Tatum, precious? Okay. It just, sometimes you got to do a little. Okay. Well, we're on to chapter 14. We're still working on pronouns. Pronouns. We've had a couple types so far. A pronoun stands in the place of a noun. And the thing that it stands in the place of is called the antecedent. Okay? We've had personal pronouns. We've also had demonstrative pronouns. Okay? Now we move on to what are called relative pronouns. The relative pronoun in English is who, which, that. Right? Who, which, or that. Now we've seen this happen before with our pronouns in English. The relative pronoun in English does actually inflect some. For case and for gender. Okay, so if you've got the masculine and it's a subject, it's who. But if it's an object, it's whom. And this is one of those things that many people never get in their lives, even people who are very well educated. I know there are people that I work with that still incorrectly use this. Usually if you want to sound intelligent, you just make it whom, no matter what, because it makes it sound like you know the difference. Whom is the object, and that goes for if it's the object of a verb or the object of a preposition. And that's why you say, to whom am I speaking? And that's why you say, whom do you love? Right? Okay, when it's possessive, it's whose. In the feminine, it's going to be exactly the same, right? But in the neuter, it's different. We don't say who for a neuter. What do we say? Well, let's go with which. Let's go with which. Which, it can be whom, can it? If it's an object in a neuter? No, probably not, though. I don't think we would do that. I think we would just do which. But if it's possessive, you can do whose, or you can do of which. All right, this is only to illustrate that English does have inflection sometimes. It's usually with our pronouns, and we only really inflect in 3 different cases, though. And we don't fully inflect for gender, although we do inflect some for gender. Okay, let me give you 4 points about relative pronouns to help you get your mind around what they are. They tend to be a little more difficult than other pronouns. Okay? First point, relative pronouns do not introduce questions. They do not introduce questions, and this is why I said let's not use what for the neuter, because it's a little confusing. I think that when people see what, they tend to think question. Okay, number 2, relative pronouns agree with their antecedents in gender and number. They agree with their antecedents in gender and number. What determines their case? Their function in their own clause. Sometimes they might incidentally agree. And then there are other cases where they can agree for a different reason, but typically they agree with their antecedents in gender and number, cases determined by the function in its own clause. Okay, number 3, relative pronouns introduce relative clauses. They introduce relative clauses. And number 4, a relative clause acts like an adjective. A relative clause acts like an adjective. So when we say, the boy who cried wolf, the relative clause who cried wolf is doing what? It's describing the boy. The whole clause acts like an adjective. Okay? So here are 4 sentences, and I want you to tell me where the relative pronoun is. Who are you? Where's the relative pronoun? Wrong! It is a trick question, because what was the first point? They don't introduce questions, people. What is that? That's an interrogative pronoun, and we'll get to that later. Interrogative pronoun. Okay, where's the relative pronoun in the second one? No! It's not a relative pronoun. What is that? It's what kind of is it? Irregular. It's irregular if you don't know what it is. No. This is also the interrogative pronoun. It's just put in an indirect question instead of a direct question. Because I could just say, who are you? I do not know who you are. This is what we call an indirect question. So that's actually just the interrogative pronoun once again. Okay, let's try this again. Where's the relative pronoun? You are the boy who still wears skinny jeans. Yes. Okay, that is the relative pronoun. How do you know that's a relative pronoun? Okay, is it introducing a question? No. Does it have an antecedent? Yes. What's it referring to? The boy. It's also introducing what kind of clause? A relative clause. So it's going to be usually the first word of the clause, unless there's a preposition like of whom or something like that. What makes something a clause? It must have a subject and a predicate. Yeah, a verb. A verb is minimally required in the predicate, but you can also have predicate complements like direct objects, right? So you got to have a verb, who still wears, there's your verb, and then there's your direct object. So that's a clause by itself. And then number 4, how is that clause functioning? As an adjective, just look at your points. You wrote them down. It's functioning like an adjective. What kind of boy? Or which boy? Yeah, all of that functions like an adjective. You see that? So that's how you know you've got a relative clause. It fits all 4 of those criteria. Now, the antecedent of who is boy. So if we inflected here fully in English, this would have to be the masculine singular version, right? Okay. 4th one, do we have a relative pronoun? Whom. Is that correct? Do we use whom there or who? Yes. Okay. You say yes. Why? Because when you want to sound smart, you say whom. Because it's the object of what? Of the person she loves. Yeah, I is the subject of love. So this is a clause. Remember, it's got a subject and a verb. The object that is receiving that action is the relative pronoun. So that's what determines the case here. What's the antecedent of whom? It could be that you could say it's she, you could say it's one. They're co-referential. They're the same entity. So this would, if we fully inflected, this would have to be feminine and singular, right? But what determines its case? Its function in its own clause. That's why we're using whom, even though she is subject in the previous clause. That make sense?
I don't understand what you mean by its context. Because, like, isn't that the case with most of like, what we've been doing in Greek? Is like the function of the sentence is what determines the case anyway. So I guess I'm not understanding like the differentiation.
Well, this is where you need to understand how to separate clauses.
Okay.
Right, so this is the main clause, she is the one. Mm-hmm. This is a dependent clause, whom I love. And within this clause, not necessarily within the context, but within this clause, it is functioning like an object.
So what would be the tendency, like how would you do it wrong? Like if you were saying that it's different, what is the tendency, like the most common mistake with that?
Well, if we just take English, since we're working with English for now, who I love would be wrong. Because it's an object, and we don't use who in English when it's an object, or at least we're not supposed to. So, in any case, that's what's going on in English. It's more difficult in Greek because they're going to inflect more fully, right? You're going to have more cases, and you're just going to inflect every time for gender. So, let me give you some examples. We'll pull them up here. Okay, that'll go away, don't worry. Okay, so here's an example. There's our relative pronoun, has. So if you see a relative pronoun, you're going to have what kind of clause? A relative clause, right? Because a relative pronoun introduces a relative clause. A clause has to have a subject and a predicate or verb. So how far does this clause go? It's actually going to go all the way to the comma this time. So you have your verb lambane, and then you have a direct object. So that's still part of the clause. But then you have and another verb, and then a prepositional complement. So there's your relative clause. What's the antecedent of has, though? How can you have an antecedent if the relative comes at the beginning of a sentence?
Singular, whatever the subject of the verb is.
Whatever the subject of the verb is. It's still a little different than we would do it in English, though. We would like for there to be an actual antecedent. They don't actually use a stated antecedent. But as you say, it actually comes, it's embedded in the main verb. So you get to the main verb here, right? Everything else is part of a subordinate clause, the relative clause. This is the main clause. Esten, you know, right? A, me, a, esten, espen, este, asen. Third person singular, so the subject is he. So this is one of those more difficult relative clauses where you actually have to put the antecedent there, which you've gotten from the verb. So he who does not take his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. There it is. So what you should do when you come to these clauses, though, always bracket them off like this. That'll keep you from, because remember, Greek as a language has a freer word order. And so a lot of times people think, well, I'm going to have to re-scramble the word order when I make my English sentence. Don't try to mix words from different clauses, though. Think of the relative clause as closed off and separate. Okay? All right, here. Han, there's our relative pronoun. That introduces the relative clause. Where does the relative clause end? Just take a guess. Comes at the end. Of course, you haven't learned verbs, but here's our verb. Okay? But notice Han. I haven't taught you the declension of the relative pronoun yet, but looking at it, you might be able to guess what its gender and number is.
Masculine, neuter, plural?
I see why you say neuter. It's not neuter. The relative is just a little bit different in form from the 2-1-2 pattern, you know. But it is singular, and it is masculine. So what in the previous context is singular and masculine? It's hard to tell by looking at aster, but you know ha, that's definitely singular and masculine. So ha aster is the antecedent. So this is not a complete sentence. It's a part of a sentence, but it says, behold the star which they saw in the east, or which I saw in the east. Could be either one, but for Matthew 2:9, I think it's they. Oh shoot, all of our lines. Okay. Here's another one. Relative pronoun, han. Now, where are we going to close it off? This is
After the woman word?
after the omen word? Yeah. Yes. Now, you haven't learned verbs yet, so this makes it more difficult, but every clause only has one verb unless there's an and linking two verbs. So there's the verb for the relative clause. You can close it off now. So the didaske is actually the verb that belongs to the main clause and the subject there. You see that? Two clauses. The main clause, the man teaches us. But you have this relative clause embedded in there that's describing the man. The man whom, because it's an object, the man whom we know is teaching us. See how that works? So that's what I would do. close off your clauses. All right. How many types of clauses are there? In the most basic terms. There's two types of clauses, right? There's independent and dependent, also called subordinate. Okay? The independent clause stands alone. A dependent or subordinate clause depends on something else. Relative clauses are what kind? Dependent. They depend on something else. Okay. Questions on the function of relative clauses? Yeah.
I mean, not really related, but so what's the difference between you and did? Is there like a difference?
No, they're both just behold.
So like just interchangeable.
Yeah.
Okay, and how about udace and maydays? Is there a difference between those two?
Yes. But it's not going to make sense to you at this point. They mean the same thing, but they're used in different contexts. Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pull up the paradigm. Is it coming on? Okay. So here's the full paradigm for the relative pronoun. Does this look familiar? Okay, what does it look like? Yeah, it looks like the 2-1-2 pattern, except where? Nominative accusative, neuter singular, which omits the new ending. We've seen that already with the demonstrative pronouns. We saw it with the article. And now it happens again here. And that's the only difference. Otherwise, it looks exactly like the 2-1-2 endings alone. Right?
It has like the os has the reading.
Right. So the difference is because it's a standalone word and it begins with a vowel, it's going to have a breathing mark, and it's a rough breathing mark. The other difference is it's always going to have an accent on it. Right? So this is going to be listed in your lexicon as has, hey, ha, like that, going across the nominative, masculine, feminine, neuter.
What's the wavy accent?
That's the circumflex. That's just how it looks in some fonts. Yeah. It's not Spanish. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so you think you could write that out from memory? You probably could. Even though you think you could write it out from memory, practice it anyway, right? And this is just how it works. Okay, questions on this? These are all going to be rough. They're all going to be rough. Every time the relative gets the rough. All right? Okay. All right, last thing that's just going to complicate it a little bit. There always has to be something that complicates it. Because the Greeks were just mean. Okay. What determines the gender and number of a relative pronoun? The antecedent. What determines its case? Its function, its clause. Often, but not all the time. There's a situation that we call attraction. Yeah. Ooh. Attraction, where the antecedent determines the case of the relative pronoun. Or put differently, the relative pronoun is attracted to the case of the antecedent. This happens usually when the antecedent is genitive or dative. So for example, genitive or dative. Okay. So where's our relative clause? It begins at haste, right? And you can tell that's a genitive feminine singular. Where does the relative clause end? Well, right there. Okay. What's the antecedent of haste if this is feminine and singular? Epangelios is feminine and singular, right? Now here's the problem. You wouldn't expect this to be genitive based on how it's functioning in its own clause. Because it says, the time has drawn near of the promise which God confessed to Abraham. Okay? So what case would you expect haste to be? Which God, subject, confessed. You would expect it to be the accusative because it's receiving the object of the confessing. Because it's receiving the action of the confessing. So why is it genitive? It's attracted to the case of the antecedent, which happens to be genitive. Okay? And again, that happens often when the antecedent is dative as well. It could be that, like people today who speak English, they didn't necessarily have a feel for the grammar. Or it could be, but since grammar is not necessarily something that's prescribed, right? I mean, there's no grammar god that tells you how things are going to go. Grammar just simply means patterns based on conventional usage. So if people begin to speak like this frequently, this will become the correct way of doing it. But it's possible that it emerged originally as we'll call a barbarism, which means an incorrect grammatical construction. I don't know the history of the construction, but that could be why.
So then if you're translating that, how would you know? Like, if you're just going to assume that it's, like, do you understand what I'm asking?
What the antecedent of haste is?
Well, I mean, you know, right? Because of what it is.
Feminine and singular.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So then how do you not translate it like an accusative there?
Well, in English it's not going to make a difference because a promise is a thing, not a person. So we're going to say which or that, and the who-whom distinction is not going to come into play.
So is it not really going to happen in instances where who or whom matters? I guess I'm asking this more from like a translation perspective, like in the English, not necessarily in the...
I don't think it'll ever make a difference because typically it happens when you would have expected the relative to be accusative, and if that's right, then it will always be whom. If it's a person, it will always be whom. Yeah, fair question. Okay, so don't let this confuse you. It's genitive, but you don't have to say of which. Do you see that? You don't need the of. It's only genitive because it's attracted to that. So just treat it like it's accusative and translate it which. Any other questions?
What page does it talk about traction?
Traction is in the advanced section in 119. Okay. All right, let's go over the vocab on 117. All right, and continue learning not just the English meaning, but also the genitive singular and the article with it, the way we read them out in class. Hey, aletheia, aletheas.
Hey, aletheia, aletheas.
Hey, Irene, Irenes.
Hey, Irene, Irenes.
And that's where we get the name Irene. Irene means peace. Enopion.
Enopion.
Hey, epangelia, epangelias.
Hey, epangelia, epangelias.
Hepta.
Hepta.
Hathranas thranu.
Hathranas thranu.
If you miss that one on the quiz, I'm going to kill you. Okay. All right. Hey, Jerusalem.
Hey, Jerusalem.
And notice that note there again. I would put these notes on your flashcards. It says it's indeclinable, so it's always going to be Jerusalem. It's not going to be Jerusalemu in the genitive. But the article could still inflect.
So that one on the quiz, you're going to have that one in the second section. That's not the...
Oh, I see, where you just have to put the meaning. Yeah, sure.
If you put it in another one, I'll...
Yeah, that sounds good.
Rewrite the same word.
Can it have its own section?
Right. Yeah, decline. I'll just put it as a declension. Decline Jerusalem. All right, kata. Kata. Notice it's a preposition. Sometimes it governs a genitive, sometimes it governs an accusative. The meaning is different for each one. So when I first learned Greek, when I was a little boy, 3 years old. Okay, that's not true. When I first learned Greek, my professor had this drawing that he did for kata, where you had like a picture of somebody on a chopping block and an axe going down. Okay, so I think that was, it doesn't really help though, does it? So that is down or against, but then the axe I think was because accusative, and you go along or according to the axe handle. Okay, but that it just kind of is all mixed up, isn't it? So genitive, the way I learned it was just genitive down from against. Okay, accusative along or according to. But make sure you note the distinction. Hey, kephale, kephales. Okay, hydrocephaly, a really terrible medical condition. What is it? Hydrocephaly. Yeah, it's where water builds up in the head, and the head swells. Hydrocephaly. We get that from hudor and kephale. All right. Hey, hadas, hadu.
Hey, hadas, hadu.
What's confusing about this one is it looks like it's second declension masculine, but the article tells you it's feminine. Okay. Has, hey, ha.
Has, hey, ha.
Hate. Okay, don't confuse that with hati, which means that or because, yeah. Uh-huh. See, still getting the laugh. All right, where's Cedric? We need him to laugh next time. He'll phone it in. Okay, hutos.
Hutos.
Ta ploion ploiu.
Ta ploion ploiu.
Ta rema rematas.
Ta rema rematas.
Te.
Te.
Hey kair kairas.
Hey kair kairas.
We get chiropractics from that, right? Chiropractics. It's practice with the hand or to do with the hand. I actually saw a chiropractor once, and they started trying to explain to me what chiropractics was. I was like, I know, it's from just do with the hand. And they were really impressed. All right, hey, psuke, psukes.
Hey, psuke, psukes.
Okay, psyche. Now here's the thing about this word, psuke. Very confusing if you don't have a very sophisticated understanding of the way language works, okay? It can mean soul, but soul doesn't necessarily, in every language and culture, mean the immaterial part of you, right? What can soul indicate?
Life.
Just your life, your being alive, right? And so we can say not a single soul had done their homework. We don't mean that the soul hadn't done the homework, right? We're referring to living individuals. And this is where in the Old Testament, suke was often used to render the Hebrew word for soul, nephesh. Now, in the Hebrew Bible, what does nephesh usually indicate? What do we mean? What do they mean by soul? Yeah, it's usually something like the organic livingness of a thing. It's not the immaterial thing that's separate from the body. Now, what happens is when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, it was only natural that they would use the word suke to render nephesh. However, if you're a Greek-minded person living in a Greek culture, what might be in the background when you see the word suke? Greek philosophy, Platonism, dualism, right? You see how culture infuses words with meaning. They're not just capsules of objective meaning. Cultural background also plays a role in how we understand that concept and the other ideas to which it relates. So when the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek, there were Greek-speaking Jews, philosophically educated Jews, who began to interpret the anthropological language of the Old Testament in terms of Platonic philosophy, and to see things in more dualistic terms, when that was not the original Hebrew conception of the human. So very, very interesting kind of theoretical problems arise when we talk about translating from Hebrew to Greek, because we're actually translating between cultures and between philosophical systems also.
So like the book of Proverbs talks a lot about like the soul, or like that's what it's translated as. So how should we as English speakers read that?
Yeah, that's a really valid question. And it depends on your hermeneutical philosophy. Kind of the classical modern way of understanding this would be to say, well, we should understand it the way that it was intended by its original author. Now, since our English Bibles are translating Proverbs from Hebrew, then a classical modernist understanding would say, well, in the original Hebrew writer's mind, that wouldn't have meant the immaterial part of them. That just would have meant their innermost being, right? The part of them that was most alive, something like that. But a different philosophy might say, well, we don't have access to the original author's mind. We can't read his intentions, and our reading is inevitably colored by our subjective lenses, and so we can just sort of make it mean whatever we want it to mean. That's the other extreme. Does original intention of the author determine meaning, or does the reader determine meaning? Or do we have a kind of text-centered approach where the text as a whole, all woven together, creates a world that clarifies meanings so that we don't need the author to tell us what the intention was? So the way that biblical studies as a discipline works is the task is to look at what the Bible meant in its original context, according to the culture of the day and the probable intentions of the author and what the first listeners would have understood when they heard it. But that's different from what we call systematic theology, which is the constructive task of bridging the gap from that ancient context and what it meant to what it means for us today, in light of all of Scripture and in light of later church dogmatic developments and even the leading of the Spirit. So, yeah. So basically, I would say if you're a Christian scholar, one way of looking at it would be to say there's a two-stage interpretive process, what it meant and what it means. But some people would want to privilege one or the other. Okay, look over at the word bubble on 119. Those are the names of the 27 books of the New Testament in Greek. And this is something that you'll want to learn. Because when you get to Greek 3 and you pick up your Greek Bible, you're not going to be able to find anything if you don't know these. And you're going to go, you're going to look at the title and it's going to look like it says katamapkon. And you're going to say, what's mapkon? And then you're going to realize that's actually a row. It's katamarkon. And you're going to make silly mistakes like that. But some of these are not necessarily obvious. Ioannou, what's Ioannou? Yeah, it's of John, the first letter of John. So here's what I'm going to do is these will be on the next exam, and you'll write them out and get credit for each one that you get correct down to the letter. Okay?
Do you care from circumflex and things like that?
I don't necessarily care about the accents. Definitely do the breathing marks where they apply. It's not for a couple weeks. I'll have to look at the syllabus, but it's a couple weeks away.
So you're going to count wrong for everything that's off of the letter? Is that what you said?
Yeah, no, it's for extra credit, so I'll count it correct for credit if it's correct to the letter.
Okay, so you did.
Yeah, yeah. I don't want to commit to that yet. I don't know. Huh? I'm scared of commitment, yeah. You can say that. Oh! Yeah. It's below the belt.
Dr. Blackwell said he would jump at the chance to teach Greek 3.
Oh, you asked him? Oh, Greek 3? This isn't Greek 3, though.
Him today, and he said he wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I was actually just doing that to make y'all feel better. He's already got a full teaching load, so. Yeah, he sees everything in English and Greek. Like, let's go. Yeah.
Really dumb question. What is the little guy in the Greek book?
The worm? He's a bookworm. He's a bookworm, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I think that's what it is.
He's a worm with 2 feet?
Well, no, he's got 2 shoes, not necessarily 2 feet.
But he has 2 legs.
Oh, does he?
Whenever people get their tongues cut, that's what happens to him.
Oh, yeah. He's. You know how you can divide worms and they'll regenerate. You can do that you can create legs for them.
I thought he was just
Okay.
science experiment.
All right. There's something that we needed to talk about.
He has like a earthworm gym kind of.
We were talking about the
Yeah,
exam.
that's what he is. The exam. Yeah, it's a couple weeks away.
I was looking on the syllabus
So-
and it said like mid-November or something.
Yeah, it's like around the 17th.
Yeah.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, it's like 3 weeks away. Oh, yeah. No, because it'll be kind of a pronoun exam. Oh, we got to get through all our pronouns first. Okay, then we're just about at the end. Seriously, registration. You guys are going to take it no matter what, right?
Yeah.
I mean, huh? Yeah. Okay. So we will continue with chapter 14 on Wednesday. You know what to do in the workbook, right? Parsing, warm up, and which ones? Odds or evens?
1 through 6.
Odds or evens? Let's do evens. All right.